Good morning. I'm Anthony Kapkan of Buildings IoT Canada magazine. Welcome to the Buildings IoT Forum session, the infrastructure you need for the solution you want. Before I continue, a very special thank you to our sponsors of the Buildings IoT Forum, WatchNet and Siemens. Thank you both for your support of this programming. If current world events have shown us anything, it's that we need to be nimble in our approach and in our materials. To get what you need to support what you want to achieve, solutions have to be purposeful and targeted. To help us understand what all this means is subject matter expert Henry Franc, RCDD, OSP, CDCDP. He is the Technology Solutions Architect for Belden Canada, acting as a trusted advisor to both end users and the professional community. He provides technical, operational, and planning support from a premise and enterprise perspective, focusing not just on products, but on business drivers here and around the world. As if that doesn't keep him busy enough, Henry has also been involved with standards development and industry best practices for more than 20 years. With that, please take it away, Henry.
Thank you for the introduction, Anthony. It was actually quite a pleasure to be invited to speak for the BIoT Forum. And it's funny that we're doing this in a virtual format because it just speaks to the ability to be able to switch directions on a dime that we need to have in this industry. And, I really like the theme that IoT isn't the end, but it's a means to the end. And often I find that these are some of the things that get lost. So I really wanted to talk to you about really the solution that you need, the infrastructure that you need, and the solution that you want. And it really all starts with needs. And so you'll hear me talk about needs and wants quite a bit through this session. And you'll see a couple different models here. And I did that purposefully just because people relate to it in different ways. So on the left, I talk about that healthy pull-push contention that always exists in our industry. Pull is what you need. I need this to make my enterprise run. Push is what technology can do. And so what you have to do is you have to be careful about being pushed in the wrong direction. And sometimes if it sounds too good to be true, perhaps it is. And I don't think that anybody's being intentionally obnoxious or nefarious with that push of technology, because really only you as the end user or the client or the agent of the client really understand what you need. And really that's what is highlighted in some of those other models. So if you look at the central pyramid, what I've done is taken Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and on the right side you see the needs of us as human beings, and on the left side of the pyramid tried to demonstrate what that is from a project perspective. We have our basic functional needs. In the IT world, it's connecting device A to device B, and then we have the governance and compliance, which is certainly important as we try and deal with COVID today. And then we have the community working with others and the efficiency of doing that. And then we want to talk about collaboration and differentiation, and eventually get an ideal model. And the color coding of this graphic isn't accidental, or in any of the other graphics you'll see on this presentation, because we want to go from the most basic needs to defining the other requirements upstream. And if you're in the cabling world, in the construction world, you'll recognize the graphic on the right. I tend to use it quite a bit when I talk about code, standards, best practices. Despite being the vice chair of the TIA standards committees and an evangelist, I'm also cautionary in how we use them because they're a compromise. And so again, this is sort of that color coding. So the most important thing always are, what are your requirements? What do you need to accomplish? From that, you'll drive some specifications. It'll be these dimensions, it'll have this performance criteria, et cetera, et cetera. Then you have codes. Codes are very important, don't get me wrong. They protect life, limb, and property. But codes don't make anything work. That's when we get into things like standards, which are minimum levels of performance. And we get into best practices in manufacturing manufacturer guidelines, and then there's always the marketing that people are aware of. And unfortunately, it tends to be that dichotomy. The most important thing in order to have a successful project is defining what your requirements are to make sure that we meet them. Unfortunately, many times the awareness is in the other way towards what we talk about from a marketing perspective. So for example, the number of people that talk to me about, oh my God, I need a smart building. Well, what is a smart building? That's a really good marketing tool and a really good marketing term. But depending on what that means to you, the solution may or may not be relevant. So we're going to get into it at the end about what is important, and how we can make sure that we're addressing those needs and how we can be nimble. We'll talk about understanding our clients' business models. And I used that same Maslow's triangle and just changed it on the left side to show you what we need from an organizational standpoint. It's your basic function or your operations. I work for a manufacturer, so our basic function is manufacturing goods. Then we move on to things like efficiency and the status quo that we always try to maintain. We go into growth and expansion. We talk about strategic differentiation, and then ultimately you try and build a brand, right? So really, when you're working with your clients, and it's not just your clients, it's everybody involved with those projects, you have to understand who they are. What do they need? What are their goals? I look at it from the client perspective, but not just the client, all those people that are involved with the project, because we have complex business relationships. You have to understand what everybody's needs are. What are their goals? And I know this is going to sound heretical coming from a cabling guy, but no one cares about cable. Not one of our clients wake up in the morning and think about, oh my God, what cable am I going to buy today? What technology am I going to implement? What IoT device, software, or hardware am I going to put into my facility? There's those of us that it is their core function to help our clients with that. But if you look at the Maslow's triangle on the right, you'll see that nowhere in there does it talk about technology. It talks about what is the basic function or operation of your organization. How do I maintain the status quo? How do I make sure I'm efficient? How do I go into growth and expansion mode? How do I talk about strategic differentiation? How do I build that brand? Because, and again, it's not that technology isn't important. It is, but we need to understand at a very basic level what the purpose of that organization was. And I always list airports first, not because of an alphabetical question, but because it was a hard lesson that I had to learn. As one of the people on the design team for the Pearson Airport redevelopment, I went and, as a good comms designer, designed the whole comms systems as a good student of comms would, that comms is the center of the universe, and so is cabling, and that's what everybody cares about. And then looking at the stone faces around the room and somewhat angry faces around the room, I realized somehow I erred. And I didn't realize how I erred. And so if I could ever find Manny again, I would thank Manny, because Manny took me aside. He says, Henry, with all due respect, you know a lot about cabling, but you don't know a darn thing about airports. All I care about in an airport is being able to move people and their bags from point A to point B as efficiently as possible. And that sort of put a light bulb in my head. And I realized it's not about the airport adapting to what I need for cabling and technology infrastructure. It's about taking the cabling and technology infrastructure that I know how to design and adapting that to the needs of the airport. So again, I like this theme that we have for this BIoT forum, and that theme follows through not just with IoT, but technology is not the end, but it's a means to the end. And we need to align with our customers' end goals by adapting our means. These changing times, things like COVID-19, have taught us that we have to differentiate between reactions and responses. There was a fantastic article I read once about how a military pilot was being interviewed by somebody, and they said, oh my God, you must have amazing reaction time. He goes, no better than anybody else. My ability and my strength is my ability to respond. There's been huge upheavals from a technology standpoint, whether it's voice over IP, and I call that convergence 1.0, or things like smart X, so smart cities, smart buildings, smart homes, smart cars, smart everything tends to be a marketing phrase, and I'm sure we'll be sick and tired of it in a year or two. But the concept is what's important, right? We have, the Internet of Things. We have global connectivity that is upending and really evolving how we look at technology. And we talk about convergence 2.0 is operational technology with informational technology. So your building operations versus your um, telephony and video and things of that nature. And unfortunately, I use the word versus, and that was actually quite intentional because it's the same issue that we had with convergence 1.0. Most of the challenges, the root cause, the challenges we had of adopting things like voice over IP and convergence 1.0 had nothing to do with technology. The technology was easy to overcome, but because we stopped talking about needs and wants and stopped acknowledging the human issues, it was mostly an issue of ego when we had convergence issues between telephony and IT. And I see the same thing going on, and I really wish we would, learn from history and realize that we can get along and we can learn from each other. So OT and IT folks need to collaborate better, and the technology will take care of itself. That's probably the easiest part. And then in reality, the disruptors will always appear, and they don't always have to be negative. We tend to focus on a lot of the negatives. But for example, with the first one, um, I really came to my own in my professional career in the dot-com boom, and then had to deal with it in the dot-com bubble burst. And very near and dear to everybody's heart right now is what's going on with COVID-19. And I think this will be a case study of how different our lives will be. We talked about everything moving into the cloud and hyperscale and going to these massive data centers. And now we see with COVID-19 instantaneously, not a transition, because we'd already talked about a transition about moving to the edge, but overnight it was like a light switch was flicked and we all moved to the edge. I don't know how many people other than technology people noticed it, but most jurisdictions in the world had to ask Netflix to dial down their quality of service a little bit, because putting everybody to the edge and giving us all kinds of free time to watch Netflix videos put too much of a strain on the network. But it talks about having a governed, proactive approach. The more we do that, the more we properly use people, processes, tools, and technology, we can have that governed approach, which is going to decrease our risk and increase our reward. Sometimes we have to, and I'm not denigrating undisciplined or reactive responses. For example, I was amazed and pleased to see some of the reactive, or in some cases even undisciplined, technology responses to COVID. I mean, in my local jurisdiction, we worked with a contractor to make a mobile hospital for Joseph Brant. That was reactive, and really that leads me into understanding how to use big data, because again, that's one of my favorite buzzwords and one of my least favorite buzzwords, because people talk about, oh my God, big data. Well, data is just data. It's just a value. So if you have a sensor, it's on or it's off. What's the temperature? What's the light value? So we really need to talk about the maturity of a data model to talk about, how important it is. And don't just rely on big data blindly, because until you go and connect all those pieces to get the information, until you can form that message, with your knowledge, and joining it together and reflecting on it to give you the wisdom, that data is kind of useless. And sometimes we'll have obnoxious or nefarious outcomes because of a data bias or a research bias, because we haven't applied knowledge or wisdom. We don't have that context and that understanding. There's a few really good case studies I've heard people speak about. For example, there was an insurance company that talked about, let's try and use past experience, see if we can do a data model to predict how long people will live. And they said, let's look at what happens in an emergency, something like the Titanic. So the insurance company, when they published all the data, they realized there was all kinds of obnoxious side effects because of noxious practices in the past. Essentially, what it said was, you're more likely to live if you're rich. Had nothing to do with your health or anything else, or the fact that the Titanic shouldn't have been where it was given its design criteria and limitations, or its operational considerations. So not having that knowledge, not having that wisdom, being able to look at the past data for context and understanding can sometimes lead to poor decision making. But when it works well, it does work well. And let's just never forget to bring in the human intelligence into that, because when we talk about AI and artificial intelligence, we're really not talking about computers, using the Terminator analogy, getting to the knowledge or wisdom stage. Really, what we're talking about AI is, somewhat just a hair above the information layer, where they're taking data, they're connecting the pieces, and taking action on it based on a set of principles. But if we don't add the knowledge and wisdom, things like that are going to fail. So we're going to continue to make progress, and so AI isn't something to be afraid of. I'm not worried about Terminator time in the near future. I just want to make sure that we're understanding the past in order to predict and act upon the future. So using that example, the sensors can provide data inputs that we need. Hey, the lights are on, I'm in the room. So you have a light sensor that tells you that lights are off. You have a motion sensor that says I'm in the room. Well, the system should and can connect those two pieces of information and act upon them and say, Henry's in the room, turn on the lights. But that system is built on knowledge and experience. And how to use the systems, when to use them, what controls are should be in place. That's really where the wisdom comes in, and we have to be careful not just to rely on data, but there's got to be some intelligence, some knowledge, and some wisdom behind that as well. So on this next slide, we talk about some of the traditional approaches to how we've solved problems. And some people may find it heretical, and hopefully, you take the challenge that implicit in this slide as constructive criticism. Because I, as a philosophy, like to celebrate failures, and first and foremost are my own failures. So all of these things, all these negative behaviors or negative actions that you've seen, I've been guilty of, and I've been lucky enough to be the recipient of constructive criticism. I've been lucky enough to be challenged by my peers and my colleagues and my clients. So I talk about some of our traditional approaches and some of the dangers in there. So, for example, I have an article out there on our corporate blog about the danger of following standards. That seems kind of counterintuitive, considering I'm the vice chair of the standards committee. The danger is in blindly following things. So that's about being overly formulaic. The over reliance we have on templates. The belief in one size fits all. So again, if I look at a commercial building standard, it says thou shalt put in 2 cables to every outlet. Well, that makes sense from a certain point of view, but in some cases it doesn't. So why are we believing in one size fits all? Why are we believing that you have to use the best quality cable? You have to future proof. I helped somebody design the Pan Am Games, and people were talking about future proofing. It's like, this is the Pan Am Games. They last 6 weeks. How long is my future? It's not that long. I don't really care. And then there's my pet peeve, and I've been very guilty about this myself, is the term generic specifications. If you look at the root words, you realize that's a specious argument, that it is a ridiculous concept. It's oxymoronical. A specification is supposed to be a specific set of documents to help you address your needs. Therefore, how can it be generic? There's a difference between a template and being a generic specification, but it's a term we've used. It's a concept we've all used, and now I think we're starting to see that that's dangerous. And the reason is, if you look at that Statista graph that I have on the bottom right of the screen, you'll see that horizontal red line. That's a line that I added, and I added that line because that shows you the population growth in that same scale for the population of the world. We've always heard that population growth is a huge challenge, and it is. I'm not belittling it at all. But if you look at the period from 2015 to 2025, that essentially flat line at roughly 7 billion people is how many people we have in the world. And people talk about IoT like it's a new thing. Well, I got news for you. Here we are in 2020, and the number of IoT or connectable devices, not necessarily connected, because I think the connection is an illusion at this point, because we're not truly connected, but we're moving in that direction, is 3 to 4 times the world's population. So all of our design guidelines, all of those traditional templates, those formulas that we've used, those generic specifications, many of the standards are around the butts in the seats. So if I'm designing the voice and data cabling for that graphic, for that office on the top right, how much intelligence is really required to do the voice and data? Almost none. I mean, if I were smart enough, I could develop an app and say, yeah, I see a chair, so somebody's going to sit there. I need a voice and a data drop. It's about the thought process that goes into it. But if I start to talk about these IoT devices, this global connectivity that we're talking about, that's really where the meat of it is. And sometimes we don't talk about that. We don't talk about the digital signage, the Wi-Fi, the 5G coverage or 4G, the carrier type stuff. We don't talk about security, access control, visitor management systems, conference booking panels. We don't talk about auto dimming lights. We don't talk about the HVAC system. That's the stuff that really needs the attention, because we've been able to design voice and data for people in seats, and Anthony's the host, and Henry's your guest speaker. It doesn't matter if Henry or Anthony's sitting in the seat. They need a drop. They're going to need a computer. Who cares? But if I have digital signage that's going to be giving you interactive feedback and wayfinding versus a meeting room booking panel, those are vastly different requirements, and they need different solutions. And I talk about, this one size fits all. People will say, oh, copper is better than fiber because it can deliver power. Oh my God, fiber is better than copper because it's so much faster and immune to signals. Or, oh, Wi-Fi. Oh, Wi-Fi is great because then I'm not tethered. Well, you have challenges with all of those things. Copper is susceptible to immunity. It can't go as fast as fiber. Fiber can't deliver power. Wi-Fi is a shared medium, and it can't deliver power at all. There's reasons why we pick media, and there's no one magic bullet. There's no one size fits all. We pick a media to deliver signal, to be immune to other signals, sometimes to deliver power, sometimes for portability in the case of Wi-Fi, and sometimes for pure mobility in the case of cellular technologies. All these different IoT devices, all of these globally connected devices that we're talking about, all have different needs, whether it's for speed, immunity, resiliency to outside impacts, requirements for power, isolation. So for example, just because you can put everything on an Ethernet IP network, does that mean you put them all on your same operational network? Do you want your lighting sensors, your door sensors, your security sensors on that same network that your voice and data is? Probably not. So you might have to isolate some of these things. You're further complicated by things of ownership. You could be the biggest bank in the world, but you might only be a tenant in those buildings. So how do you interact with those different people? And then there's issues of command and control that are always going to be important as well. And this is really what I want to talk about, and that people will say, what should I do for my infrastructure solution? And not understanding what their needs are, my answer will be, I don't know and nothing, because it's the Goldilocks principle. The porridge is too hot, it's too cold, or it's just right. Without any information, the odds of me getting it just right at best are 1 in 3. We have all those pieces. We have the copper, the fiber, the steel components in order to build things, whether it's the copper connectivity, the fiber connectivity, or the racks and cabinets, which is what I call the steel. We have the hardware and software, and we need to put them together the right way. And again, just remember that one size doesn't fit all. And I always talk to people about this when we go through a solution. This is a good way of checking to make sure that we have the right solution. I always used to talk about the volume, velocity, and the vector. But when I thought about it more, it's like, okay, well, wait a minute. It's more than just the volume defining the scope, the velocity understanding the goals, and the vector providing that direction and momentum. It's about the values. Do I have all the right information? Do I have a variety, right? Have I explored all of the options? And it doesn't necessarily mean doing a deep dive, but everything could be from, let's use that example of that triage hospitals, like put in no connectivity to, pure Wi-Fi, to let's cable, let's do everything in fiber, let's do everything fiber, copper, wireless, 5G. And some of them are going to be so outrageous that, by their very nature, that they can be discarded right away, and then you can go and explore those options properly. And with that comes the veracity, ensuring the accuracy and accountability. Is it the right solution? Does it align with our needs? And if we can ensure that we have that methodology, that philosophy, I think our solutions will be a lot better. So here's how to be relevant, here and now. This is a concrete example. So this will hopefully resonate with people. And whether it's applicable to your business or not, I think everybody can understand where we're coming from. So the needs are constantly evolving. I would dare say that no one on this call could have predicted a year ago the current working environment, the current commercial environment that we're living through. So those needs are constantly evolving, which means our solutions must be timely, relevant, they must be purposeful. And to do that, we have to be creative, not formulaic. We have to use playbooks, to give you that governed, proactive approach, not just blind templates. If this, then that. This is the response versus reaction. We have to have project specifications. This is what I want to do at this moment in time, not generic. We have to understand the operational technology requirements. That's not necessarily people-centric. And we have to overcome those silos and not be bound by ownership. Ownership is still going to be something that you have to consider. But we're going to have to break down those barriers. We're going to have to break down those egos, not just of individuals, but of organizations and industries in order to move past that. So really practical, timely example is visitor management systems. I've seen them. Some of the clients I've gone to visit have these really cool iPads at their desk, and you sign in and, it notifies somebody that they're there. And really that it's about command and control. And you're trying to increase flow in a repeatable way. And, it's like, hey, that's really kind of cool. It prints up your badge and puts a sticker on you. And some of the people I've been working in with the industry have said, just the explosion of these type of systems. For example, let's look at public venues. We could look at your grocery store. You could look at long-term care facilities. So one of the ones on the top right, a colleague of mine at Direct Supply is working with long-term care facilities. And so they're having to put command and control visitor management systems in. And what they're finding is, people that are going to those next steps, that are doing those, nimble, timely solutions, are already building in things like temperature sensors. So if you go to sign in, like say I was going to go see my mom is a resident at a long-term care facility. I would love it if they had one of these systems, because I would go in, they would ask me my screening questions. Who am I? Do I have an appointment to see my mom? Have I felt sick? Da, 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 da. They'd have a temperature sensor built in that's going to go and see, do I have a fever? They're going to have facial recognition. Am I wearing the mask that I promised I would? Right? It's going to provide you that audit trail. And because they're also worried about capacity, it's going to enforce those capacity limits. They don't have to manage the day-to-day. It's enforcing those capacity limits. They have an audit trail. They're making sure that they're screened, that they should be there, that they have a mask, and that they don't have a fever. And then they only deal with the exceptions, right? And it's the same in every industry. So I think you can find many approaches. And that's just sort of a common example where, some of these people didn't even think about these things a year ago, or didn't think about how they could just be combined. The people at Envoy that do the visitor management, kind of the same thing. It's like, it's just a whole new world. It's like, yeah, let's just add on another sensor. That is the beauty of IoT. It's not the end, it's a means to an end. It's a means to reopening safely. It's a means to being able to go visit my mom at a long-term care facility. So it's a wonderful thing. But again, we just have to be creative. We have to understand what our needs are and tailor make those solutions. And here's my contact details should you want to reach out and have a dialogue. So thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Henry. As a building owner, building manager, what sort of language do you need to use to help communicate your needs so that the person designing your communications infrastructure kind of gives you what you want and doesn't just give you a whole bunch of
Mhm.
bells and whistles that you're never going to use. Or alternatively, we could approach that question from the perspective of the designer and saying, what are the sort of questions that you need to be asking? What are the sort of things that you need to be observing of this work site to help you formulate a logical plan?
That's a fantastic question, Anthony. Thank you. And it's something I didn't cover. Language is important. My advice is the same, whether it's from the owner, user perspective, or the service provider perspective. Ask qualifying questions. One of the worst things that we do is use acronyms in our industry. I would argue the same could be said in our user groups. Um, so, sort of the quintessential example is when we were helping to write the healthcare standard, we had to use different language. And everybody says, well, why do we have to use different language? Well, in the telecom space, we have equipment rooms. And what do we call, we don't like calling things by their name, so we always use acronyms. So we talk about ERs. So if I talk about ERs, to somebody in the healthcare world, if they're not technology centric, they're thinking about emergency rooms. But we have to use healthy dialogue to go towards the center so we can understand each other.
Henry, thanks again for taking the time to deliver this presentation, deliver your expertise, and to get all of us thinking about needs versus wants. And thanks to all of you for attending and checking out this session. Henry's contact information is there on screen, so do please give him a shout, and he'll help put you on the right path. Uh, Henry, thanks again. Thanks to all of you. Have an excellent day, everyone.